Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are at the Nurburgring Nordschleife for a very special track guide in the IndyCar. Slightly different, I'm releasing it earlier than the PDS data pack, so it's in slightly different weather conditions that more accurately reflect what we're going to experience in the actual race sessions. And I'm using a lightly modified spa setup for my team rather than a PDS setup, just so that I'm not spending so many laps trying to put in a decent lap. My lap time here was a 6:37.970, I believe. And yeah, let's not talk too much more about it before we start. Let's just go watch the lap first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how I'm going to explain the lap before diving into the track guide. So here we go. there we go, guys. 6:37, 9:30. So yeah, before we start talking about the lap, let's kind of just go over how I want to approach the track guide, because obviously it's very long, and for me to kind of break down every individual corner isn't really going to help you that much, because it's such a long track that to really be able to fine-tune each corner, which is what these track guides should help you with, I think, to some degree, you can't really sit down and go, one corner at a time to practice and drill down each corner. Now, you can get close to that by using the reset feature. So if you go into your settings and you map a button for enter, exit, and tow the car, if you actually stop on the Nordschleife, what it will do is it will reset you to a point a little bit behind where you were, to like a marshal kind of post. And so you can do that to continue, taking the same bit of track over and over again. But the problem, especially in this car, is on cold tires, the car is very dangerous, and so you're not getting that same kind of feeling. And so as you try to get up to speed, the main way you're going to do that is just by doing more and more laps and building up your confidence in the car. Now, I've already done about 2.5, 3 hours of practice, and this lap was recorded on a few days ago on Wednesday. So that's almost a full week before the Nordschleife week even is happening, right? So it's just going to take a lot of laps, and you're going to have to build up your confidence in both the car and also your confidence in your knowledge of the track and knowing what's coming up next. Now, before we talk too much more, the only other thing I want to say is there's two things which you're going to hear me repeat a lot, and so I apologize in advance for just how much I'm going to repeat that, but it is very important that everywhere you can here, you get the best run out of the corner possible. So you carry the maximum amount of momentum on corner exit as you can, and that's because even though there's only 3 main long straights, so obviously you've got the Dodinger, which is the last straight, then you've got the run after Flugplatz, which is the first run after you get onto the Nordschleife, and then you've got the run up towards Bravery, which is right before the Carousel. Now those are obviously the longest straights of the track, but most of the track itself is corners that are combined with some kind of straight. And so the better run you get out of the corners that lead onto the straights, the more time you're going to gain. And the way you do that is by trailing the brakes in, making sure you're slowing the car as much early, and then still trailing the brakes in while you turn the car, and 2, using the throttle to continue turning the car and actually power it out of the corner. So I'm going to say this a lot. You're going to have to turn the car on brakes and trail it in, and you're going to have to use the throttle to turn the car as much as possible. Now you'll notice this wasn't a perfect lap either, so even though it's a 6:37, which I'm pretty happy with, if I'm pushing as hard as I was on this lap, for the rest of my practice, I might be able to get this down to a 6:35. But in race pace, you're not going to want to push at that level because it is such a hard combo and you're risking so much more. So it's better to maybe dial it back, race at 90%, and so maybe my race pace is more like a 6:40. But with that said, let's go ahead. And we have a question, is this max downforce? No, I'm running a modified Spa setup, and Spa was not max downforce for us, so still not max downforce here, but I think for a lot of people it will be safer to run max downforce, especially if they don't have the knowledge of the track. Now, I went and looked at my VRS data, and before we get to turn 1, I have 1,000 complete laps of the Nordschleife in just the VLN and 24-hour layout, okay? That doesn't include all the off tracks I've had and all of that. These are just complete and clean race laps. So I have a lot of experience here, and that's part of the reason why it does enable me to get up to speed faster than a lot of other people. But coming down into turn 1, you're going to brake a little earlier than expected because the GP circuit doesn't feel as good as the Nordschleife does. And so you really find that you back up the GP circuit trying to just minimize the time you lose, rather than on the Nordschleife where you're really pushing, especially in practice, to gain as much time as possible. So as we come down towards turn 1, we're braking early, just before we get to this grassy patch over here. And a downhill braking zone. You just want to make sure we don't run too deep into the corner here, because we want to try and cut as much of this inside curb as possible. You can get two wheels all the way to this inside curb. And then power down as early as you can. Now, there is a bump, obviously, and so that does unsettle the car. And in this case, what it also does is I get on the power a bit too aggressively because I got sent out wide, and I light up the rear a little bit. It's not too bad. A little bit of a lift coming into turn 2, you might want to use a bit of the brake if the rear end is unstable to just slow the car and get it turned in. Then power it down and brake very early into this next corner because you want to try and hug this inside curb just as much as possible. So you can see I'm almost all the way on the inside. You don't want to take too much, you will get an off track. But I'm trying to set it up the corner so that I come out as close here on the left-hand side. So in this right-hand kink, I don't have to lift off the throttle as much as possible. Now, I don't do a terrible job here, but I do have to lift off quite a bit. But then slowly back on the power. You don't want to run onto this green stuff, and you see the rear coming around a little bit. But now you'll run onto this shortcut for the VLN circuit. So you're going to brake early here, maybe around the board that you're going to go under here, the advertising hoarding. This is a very weird corner because it's connecting two different parts of the track that aren't, really the same type of cambered in. So you're going to go from like over the ridge of the exit of this track downhill. But then you start coming up, and I don't feel like this is a perfect crest sometimes. And again, I lose the rear a little bit, but it's not too bad. Rejoin the regular track. And just, again, I'm trying not to lose too much time here. So you see I am pushing, but more of what I'm doing is I'm just, you saw how early I got turned in there. That's because I'm really trying to back up this part of the track. Because that's what felt better to me. So very carefully trailing the brakes, running as wide as you can here. That's not an off track, so you can do that. Then you run down towards the chicane. Another place where you still have to build up a lot of confidence. I'm still struggling a little bit here, but you're going to brake right before you get to the 50-meter board, down into third gear. And you're trying to get as close to that as you can get without hitting it and taking too much of it. Because if you hit it, you'll unsettle the car. But you can also get an off track here. So being careful and then swinging the car back to the right as early as possible. And again, avoiding the green patch of the inside of the curb because that will get you a slowdown. And you saw I actually had to get out of the throttle a little bit. So here I was at 100% mid corner, but that didn't really work out because it sent me a little bit too far. So just something to watch out. And then you head down onto the Nordschleife for the first time. So no real braking reference here. Maybe you can use some of the pit markings on the right, but this is again something that you just kind of have to get a feel for. And again, trailing the brake and then powering the car back up the hill. And here's where you come to your first little difference between other cars. So you're carrying 170 kilometers an hour here, and I think a lot of people would want to try and get the car as much to the right-hand side of the track after you pass this curb, so you can widen the arc of this next hairpin as much as possible. But the problem is I'm already braking here because I'm going so fast, and so you don't really get an opportunity to get out wide because you, again, want to get your braking done in a straight line, and you don't want to try and go off at the wrong angle, so then you have to make the corner tighter in the end. So not running out wide, getting down on the power as early as possible because you've got a nice downhill run here. You're going to keep it flat around this next corner, the Heusinkveld, or I guess we're coming towards the Heusinkveld here. And you're going to brake around the graffiti. Now, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I feel like depending on your graphical settings, you might have different graffiti to meet. So try to just keep that in mind when you see me pointing out braking references. You don't want to try and copy them one for one. Maybe it's better to try and find other points on the track where you are already looking and use those as your braking references. But we're going to brake right around the edge of this graffiti here. And I get on the brakes hard initially, trying to scrub off speed before we get into this first part, because I want to get off the brakes a little bit to let the car roll into the second part of the corner, but also there's two parts here. So I'm trying to slow to make the left-hander because you're trying to set up for a right-hand kink. But again, you're trying to carry as much momentum as possible. So you're going to see I'm going to get off the brakes quite a bit actually in this next part because I'm rolling the momentum through, getting back on to trail it just a bit more. And then as soon as I'm ready and I know that I'm not going to run too wide, I get back on the full power before I get back into this next section of S's. And you can't go full throttle here, so again, you're going to have to be careful on the throttle. You see me managing it, just managing the weight of the car as well on the brake, trying not to use the curbs. You saw just how early I picked up the throttle here. Like, we're not that far into the corner, and if I go to the next frame, I think here, okay, There we go. So that's pretty early pickup on the throttle. So again, I'm just trying to show you how early you can pick up the throttle here. Now this is an important braking zone because this is the first run down to your long straight. So this is on the run up towards Flugplatz and then down towards Schradenkreuz and Armberg. So I get it a little bit wrong on this lap, so this is not the ideal kind of example, but this is one of the few cases where you can use the curbing on the track to get an advantage. Now the curbing at the Nordschleife is fairly high, and so you typically, if you get on it, you kind of make your car go at an angle. And it's not always ideal. Sometimes you'll rub the plank on the ground. And so typically it's best to avoid the curbs, and you saw that in the S's before. This is one of the curbs where you can use it a little bit just to keep you a little bit more tucked on the inside. And you see, I actually, because I miss it, I go out so wide that I get off the throttle, or I have to delay the throttle, and it kind of just, it's not the cleanest exit. If we watch it in real time, like if you watch that steering input as well, it's not the cleanest. So back that corner up a little bit more and you'll get a better run down towards Flugplatz where you're now flat out. You just got to time the turn in right. You want to get as close to that inside curbing as you can possibly get. So steering in around this access road, as close to that inside as you get, and hold it on the inside as well. So because then you'll run out wide here and you got another long run, or the big part of the run, and this is where you go downhill. And so, at least in my setup here, we're reaching 300 kilometers an hour. This is the highest speed part of the track. Flat out through Schradenkreuz. Just got it. It's not an unsettling feeling here in the car, but if you get your steering wrong, maybe turning a bit too late, you just run wide and it'll feel uncomfortable in your next braking zone here. Now in a GT3 car, you would use this tarmac patch, like where the color changes, at least on the V6 tires, as your braking reference. But in the IndyCar, you got a bit more downforce, so even though you're carrying a bit more speed, you can go a bit deeper. In this case, I actually go too deep, and so we're going to watch. You can see I lock the inside front, and I'm going to miss the apex by a considerable margin. And that delays me getting on the power. But what actually happens is I'm too eager because of that mistake to get back on the power. And so I get full power fairly early. So I'm there full power, but you'll see I get onto the curb, because you can see the car just dancing around a little bit. So onto this curb, and you see I have to lift because of what's happening there. The car is, I'm not going to really edit the camera because that would be a bit too much of an inconvenience, but you can see the sparks coming out of the rear end there. That's not an ideal situation, so again, just highlighting how important it is to stay off the curves. Now you come down towards one of my favorite parts of the track in this car, Arjuna Forest, which is a flat-out commitment entry for the IndyCar. You use the curb here because you need to set up on the left-hand side, and you lift as you're coming over the curb. And that's not because the car is getting unsettled. That's just because I need to start slowing down for this right-hand corner. But you try not to slow too much here because you don't want to scrub off too much speed, because the big hard braking now is going to come right here. So you kind of set this up to come to the left-hand side here, and you take this right-hand corner, at least I take it, a little bit wide on exit so that you kind of straighten the next braking zone a little bit more. So you can see I run all the way wide, and this is on purpose. I do this every time. And then once I get to this marker right here, that's when I put the peak pressure on, and then that's when I get third, second, first. I get a little bit wide here, and that's just because I didn't get on the brakes hard enough. I got on the brakes at the right point, just not hard enough. And the reason why that's a little bit of an issue is if we switch back to the cockpit cam, you can see that I'm down in 8,000 RPM. So I'm in first gear and I'm out of the peak range of the engine. And so the earlier you can pick up the throttle here and keep the car turned in. So in prior laps, I would even be on the throttle towards this stage, so even earlier. That's just going to help bring up the RPM of the engine. And once you get to this next part of the right-hander, just help you get to the peak power a little bit more. Now you've got a little bit of a short run. So flat out. Through that next part, easy. Nothing to really talk about through there. And then we get towards a fairly tricky corner actually, because again, you don't really have a braking point. The one thing you can kind of use is this curbing on the outside. I don't know what the word for it is, but that's about where you would brake, and you're going to go down from fifth into second. You see that's just how hard I'm braking and trailing it off pretty quickly here because I'm trying to get back on the throttle. You can see flat out, even though the car was trying to turn a little bit, so again, just trusting what the car is doing. Then we go into this downhill right-hand hairpin. So you can see that I'm going to run a little wide on the initial entry, and that's because you can see right about now, the radius of the corner actually tightens a little bit further on. So by running a bit wide, you actually get a better exit out of the corner. And I keep talking about the importance of exits. You can see, again, not a bad exit there. And then you go flat out through this part. Now this feels a little weird, just because of how the car is bumping. You have to get all the way to the left-hand side of the track here because you're going to lift to about 10 or 20% throttle going through these three very fast blind right-handers. Now, I run a little bit wide here. You can see the car's just pushing and I'm getting out of the throttle, trying to manage that. You can see some wild throttle inputs there. But as soon as you can get full power, go full power. I lose a little bit of time because of the car understeering, but just trying to maximize the speed through that corner because you're not on the brakes. But you're going to brake fairly early for this next corner. There's not really a braking reference here, so that black Yokohama board, you're going to brake right about there maybe. So there's not really, yeah, I was right about there. So there's not really a braking reference going down. Again, you're going to not brake too hard because you're not trying to scrub too much speed as we go into the first part of the corner. What you're trying to do is set up the second part of the corner. So again, increasing the brake pressure now that we've coming through that first part of the corner. I do lose the rear a little bit now. If you carry too much speed, you'll lose the rear even more. And that's a problem. But this is, again, another... There's a few parts of the track where, at least for us, the setup that we're using, you're never going to be 100% comfortable. And this is one of those places. So this is one place where you saw how early I braked into the corner. And even then, having a little bit of moment, having to correct on steering, but getting out of the corner quite nicely here. The only reason I had to have a little bit of a lift here is because I didn't really get the turn in quite right. So ideally, you'd come in a little bit more at this angle instead of this angle. And so that just partially because I had that little correction mid-corner, but that pushes me a little bit outside. And so I lift just making sure I don't run wide. I don't want to risk a slap. It's already been a fairly decent lap. You're going to brake at the edge of this curb here. And fairly steep braking because what you again want to do is you want to keep the car pinched in on the inside here. You still want to get a good exit, but you can't risk running too wide. So I do kind of do that here. And you can see that by the fact that my throttle input is a little bit not as clean as I'd like. But you want to get as much power as you can. I actually go from second into third. I mean, this is one place because I'm running downhill. I really want the momentum of the car as much as possible to keep going. But then as you come back uphill and you come back to this edge of this curb, you brake again, slow the car down, and try and shoot again out of this corner because this is a little bit more of a long run and it's leading towards the big braking zone before the really big run. Here we go. Going to brake around this black Yokohama board for berg work. And hard on the brakes, really hard on the brakes. It is downhill, so it's a little bit tricky sometimes, but you need to get the braking done as early as possible because you want to roll the momentum of the car really as early as possible, and that means getting on the throttle. So you can see I'm trying to hold it, and the reason I'm trailing, even though I'm not slowed down as much as I want, is I'm that eager to get on throttle here. This run up, the run that we're about to get is all uphill, so the worse the exit you get is, the more momentum you just lose as you go up the hill. So you could see, just trying, just waiting, just hoping, and there we go. As soon as I was there, I got a little bit early, so back to 80% for a second, for just a millisecond rather, but there we go. Now we're on this big run up the hill. Quickly grab a drink of water. You can see me hugging the inside of the track here. I do that because the IndyCar has enough downforce that it could do that, and I don't feel like you're losing enough time. But now we're coming towards Bravery, and Bravery in an IndyCar is kind of a non-event. You get as wide as you can get. I don't like ever getting onto that curbing. It just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable in any kind of car. So you can see me holding the track width here. Trying to time the turn in. I get it a little wrong, but it's all right. This is not too bad. You can see I do get kind of half a wheel onto the curbing, but nothing too bad. Then you set it up to move to the left-hand side of the track, and this is actually fairly important, this next part here. As you come around this right-hander, you cannot afford to stick to this left-hand side of the track. You have to move over to the right-hand side. And as we keep going, you can see we're going into this corner. But now, as we get closer into the corner, you can actually see that the curb here actually kind of forms a straight line as I'm drawing it right here. And so if you take the line that I took, which is to come to the right-hand side of the track and then do your braking, it means that in this case, you get a slightly better drive off the corner as you come around this hairpin. If you were to come to the left-hand side, you're going to be braking basically onto that curve. So you see how this draws a this draws a straight line of its own, and it basically points right towards that curbing right here. So coming to the right-hand side, I did brake a little bit late, so you want to brake a little bit earlier at the start of this yellow graffiti. So you can see me getting off the brakes, trying to just mitigate the effect of that lockup that I had. Getting on the power. Now we come to the carousel. Now someone asked me while we were watching the lap just before, wow, you're using the low line. And yes, you're using the low line because you just lose so much more time by going around the outside, which is not as banked, and therefore you take less speed around it. Now, it's not a corner you can attack, so I'm braking it around this tree. And you try to drop in fairly high, so you can see maybe I turned in a little bit too early here, and that's why maybe I actually got down onto the inside part, like effectively the apron of the carousel. But it's okay, I recovered that and got back into the main groove. But you can see just how careful I have to be on throttle. I'm not able to attack, and you can see that just how the car is moving because of how bumpy that part of the track is. So not the nicest part of the track in the IndyCar. You could see as I came over the top of that crest there, it's very possible that one of these tires actually did not have contact patch with the ground because it may have been bottoming on the top of that curve. But anyway, out of the carousel now. And now this is where a lot of people, I think, will struggle with how much commitment is actually required in this car. So this is where it starts to get a little bit more twisty and requiring a little bit more driver input, I would say. So a little bit of brake trailing into this first part of the corner just because of how much speed you're carrying. Down a gear into third. Trying to carry momentum and keep building the momentum as you come towards this next braking zone. Try to avoid getting on the curb. I know I did that, but ideally you would stay off the curb because you can see it does upset my car a little bit. And I think it actually contributes to the fact that I turned in a bit, or I at least got a little bit too much turn in. And so I touched the curb again, which you don't want to do. We go flat now through this next part. Now we head towards, I don't know what these corners are called, but I call it the fun stuff. And you see, I'm actually trailing the brake just a little bit. And that's not because you can't carry the momentum through the corner. It's just because I feel like it's better to back up the corner a little bit here. So you can see I stick closer. We'll play it back slowly. But you can see I'm sticking much closer to this inside of these first double lefts because we have this right-hand corner coming and it's like a downhill. And so I'm just trying to maintain the momentum, carry as much of it as I can. So you can see I'm getting on the throttle. You can potentially clip this curb a little bit because of how the track is kind of cambered down now. But you can see me trying to avoid that. I'm trying to be sensible because I've had a few curb hits right before. Getting on the power. And you come to another very tricky corner. Now, I said before, there are a few corners here where the car likes to get light on you, and this is one of them, even without what I did in this corner. So you can see I turned in a bit too early, and I get on the curb. And so the curb here kind of exaggerates the effect that coming over this crest has. So you're coming over the crest of a hill here. And so you anyway kind of get the rear being a bit light. But you can see here just how much bounce I get. And that's an exaggeration of what kind of happens when you come over the crest anyway. So, you know, in some ways it's good that I did that. But you can kind of get an idea of something similar happening when you do come over the crest. You'll sometimes just come over carrying a little bit too much speed. Car might not be 100% straight, and that can really set the rear loose, and usually you get spun into this inside wall here. But anyway, heading back now down towards another set. Now this one you have to brake a lot more for, because unlike the one before where you could carry the speed through the corner, you just wanted to set it up a little bit better. Here you really have a very tight left-hander. You can see me coming in, hitting this kind of double apex, trying to get as much on the left as I can before sending it, trying to run wide again, but again, not too wide. You can get an off-track here if you slip onto the exit of the curbing. And then we come towards one of the YouTube famous corners. There's a lot of good clips of cars spinning and dying from races and track days here, but very similar to that one just before where I was talking about how the car gets light, but to a lesser degree. You can attack this corner a lot more, and you can see how much more confidence I have running all the way out to this curbing and then setting up the next corner. Now this is a fairly hard braking zone, and you're trying to get the car turned early because you really can't afford to get close to this curbing on the outside, because as it is, you can see me getting to full power, and then as we come over the crest here, I have to get back to 80% throttle because the car just gets too light. Now if you get on the curb as well, that's going to unsettle the car even more, and you're going to have to manage that with additional input. So avoid the curb there at all costs, but we come now towards the jump, which isn't a jump in an IndyCar. You kind of go flat out here. But you do have to brake a little bit as you enter this next double right-hander. Otherwise, you're just going to send yourself into the gravel. But you're trying to stick to the inside here because you have a left hand. It's almost flat, but you have a left-hand corner coming out right at you after this. So you can see sticking to the right-hand side of the track. And actually lifting a little bit here because, again, it's not as bad as like a few corners that I've talked about before, but this is another place where I don't have the confidence yet in the car because of the way the weight is shifting at the back to go full throttle. Now you went to the bell off S's, and your line here is very important. If you don't hit this, I pressed the wrong button, sorry. If you don't hit this line right and you don't stick close to this inside and you maybe come over a little bit too far to the right, the additional steering input that you will have as you come over the hill is going to send your car sideways. So try and stick as much to the left as you can here, minimizing the amount of steering. This is all flat though. And we're going flat out through the bell off S's here. Trying to just cut a line through the curves. And with just a few corners to go here. So this is just a lift off the throttle. Now again, you're thinking about the next corner in advance. And we've got this left-hand, almost 90-degree uphill kind of corner. So I'm going to get on the brakes kind of midway through this corner. Just slow the car a bit and make sure I'm hanging onto that right-hand side of the track. But then you have the big braking zone coming down into second gear. Again, trying to look to attack this corner. You can run quite wide here. So you can see I get basically all the way out to the edge here. I don't feel too uncomfortable about how much curb I use there. But we're up, third gear. You've got to brake fairly early because we're now at the second carousel. And the second carousel it's not as frustrating as the first carousel can be because that one is so long and you can't attack it. But this one you still have to attack it fairly aggressively because you're carrying momentum up towards the last corner before the Dottinger. So you can see here, down into first gear, I scrubbed, maybe 60, 70 kilometers an hour. And what I try to do is I try to hold as close to the inside curb as possible. Now, it doesn't work too well here, so you can see I actually come up the track too much. What ideally I'm trying to do is actually take that line. So this space here is where I want to send the car. And that's just because as you crest here, you can see, right? So there's kind of this, it's a little difficult to tell from the sound, but you could, right around there, that's where the slope kind of levels off. And so as we come over that part of the track, we'll see probably a bit more sparks, I think, but you can just see it's not, the rear end isn't exactly where it needs to be. I'm, again, searching for confidence on the throttle here. And so ideally, for me, I'm trying to be here. I don't fully understand what happens here. I turned in at the right spot. I think maybe I just got a little bit loose, carrying a bit too much speed. Maybe I hit the curb. I don't know. But you can see I have this little bit of a wiggle in the steering a bit earlier. That's just the force from me hitting the carousel. Yeah, I don't know what's happening there, but whatever happens there, that's what causes me to come out wide. And now we've got this like it's almost a 180 degree hairpin, I would say, but you're going to try and carry as much speed as you can. So we're going to brake a little bit as we get to the edge of this curbing on the left-hand side, a little bit earlier, sorry. So right around this orange graffiti, it looks like. Just a little bit of brake, because you do want to run wide here, is what I'm going to try and say, because as you come here, you're going to run the momentum of the car all the way around the next part of the corner. But as you come through this first kink, you can't afford to get too wide, because if you get too wide, then you kind of just spear off into the grass and it becomes very hard to recover. So just backing up the corner a little bit so you can attack the entire way around now this right-hand 90-degree kind of corner. So you can see me hugging the inside here. I'm just going to play it at full speed. There's not much to say. It's flat out, all the way now down the Doddinger. Now, if we go on the... as I apologize for blowing your eardrums up, you can see that I'm staying in 5th gear here, holding about 11,600 RPM. That's because... Oops, wrong camera. Actually, that camera works pretty nicely. So you can see, up until about this part, you're going downhill. Now you start going uphill. So this is not the place where you actually are going to carry or achieve the top speed of your car. Like I said before, that run down towards Schroudenkrautz, where you get 300 kilometers an hour, that would be where you get the most speed on the track. Here we go, we still got a corner to go. Well, I say a corner, it's a series of corners, I guess, but you're going to take the initial left-right completely flat out, and braking right. See, this is where it gets tough, because some people might try to use the shadows as a reference, but if for whatever reason the weather setting for the actual race session is slightly different, maybe more cloudy or whatever it is, that shadow isn't there, then you won't have a braking reference. So maybe try using that heart on the ground. That's right around where I put the brakes on. And so trying to slow the car, you'll notice that I'm avoiding this inside of the curb, inside of the track, even though that will set me up better on the left-hand side to then carry as much momentum as possible. It's a little bit lower than the track, so if we get a bit closer, you can kind of see it's a little bit off camber kind of compared to the rest of the track, and so that unsettles the car more than I'd like, and so it's safer to just take this kind of a line. You're still carrying plenty of momentum, as we see here. I've almost finished trailing the brake, and by the time we get about here, I'm going to be almost at 80% throttle, I'm pretty sure. Maybe a bit later. But it's fairly aggressive on the throttle here. Because again, now we've got a little bit of a run down towards turn 1. Even though you have a corner here, it's a corner where you can carry most of the momentum around. So you can see I'm being patient. You want to run wide as much as possible here. So you can see I do get a bit sideways, which is what is delaying me on throttle. And actually, if anything, that kind of helped me, because in other laps I've been running very close to the wall. So that's a little bit safer, because you obviously don't have much visibility when it comes to, that's a fairly safe, comfortable margin of error, I would say. But I've been right up against the wall on previous laps. But yeah, that's it. Run down towards the start-finish line. What we will do, though, is we'll quickly just point out where pit entry is. So this white line on the track, that is where your pit entry is going to be. You're going to have at least 2 stops in this race. So just make sure you practice pit entry. A rough braking reference will be if the yellow cones are there. Maybe this, if you can see this red marker on the other side of pit lane. Maybe that. If we scroll a little bit back, you can also see these white Nurburgring track signs. Maybe those might be a good reference. But yeah, 6:37.930. I hope that helped you guys, because I'm not sure what else I can really say about the track. Like I said, it's something that you guys are going to need a decent amount of practice for. It's not something you're just going to be able to jump in and forget being competitive after just jumping in. It's not something that you're going to really, unless you're a very good driver, you're not going to complete a lap. So definitely recommend you get as much practice in as you can. Don't be afraid, though, of using that reset button like I mentioned at the start. So again, it is just this enter, exit, tow car button. Just remember that when you do use it, maybe 5 or 6 corners it will take before it starts to feel better. So just take it a bit easy, even if that you just crashed at a corner. Don't try to go full beans into it until you have warmed up the tires and feel a bit more confident in them. The other thing I would say is don't be disheartened if you are maybe running less. You have less top speed than me if you're running more downforce. You can make up time in a lot of different ways on this track. And so the BMW Z4, for example, the GT3 car, it's not particularly quick in a straight line, but it makes up all that time in other parts of the track. So the same thing will happen in the IndyCar. As you practice more and more, you'll find that if you're comparing against your best lap, your session best lap, or your all-time best lap, even across multiple weather settings, you might find yourself being faster in the warmer setting, session setting, because you're more comfortable in the car, able to push a little bit more, and you'll just find you'll find more and more time around the track. So if we look at my split, I'm currently at a 6:36.473. And most of my driving has been in warmer weather than what I practice in today. And again, remember, description for all of those weather settings. But yeah, I hope that helped you guys. If you have any questions about the track, please do put them in the comments below. I'm very happy to try and answer any questions that you may have. If you're in the Pure Driving School Discord, also feel free to send me a message there. I'm fairly active in there as well, and more than happy to try and give some additional help over what is already provided in terms of setups, telemetry from them, this track guide. Yeah, and if you liked it, just remember, go ahead, give it a thumbs up. That really does help me and tells me that you guys like watching these videos. And yeah, go ahead, subscribe if you want to see more of these. Go follow me on Twitch if you like watching live IndyCar racing, because I do a lot of that as well on the channel. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Just leave me a comment if you guys have any questions, and see you next time.